country that's done socialism the way that you like?
I would say China is probably the closest, I would say, to an example that we should follow.
Like communism in America?
I think that communism would be most likely an international thing. It'd be like the Star Trek universe.
You think the Reform Party is
I think
fascist?
Reform Party, as it stands currently, is a nascent fascist parliamentary group that hasn't...
欢迎来到胤蓝智库。西方社会引以为傲的言论自由，是否是霸权的衍生物呢？当霸权衰退，所谓的自由是否也会随之崩塌呢？今天我们将拆解一期深度的时政访谈节目，直击这一硬核的结构性追问。在全球通胀与阶层撕裂的当下，两位拥有跨国背景的学者展开了激烈的思想博弈。他们跳出了简单的意识形态，试图从地缘政治宏观角度重新审视资本主义与社会主义的底层运行逻辑。在这场对话中，嘉宾抛出了3个极具穿透力的论点：第一，若将尽最大努力改善最广泛人群的物质条件作为国家治理务实的标准，当前的中国是西方最值得研究和吸取教训的案例。第二，美国民众拥有的言论自由本质上是因为美国长期处于全球主导地位，在这种绝对安全的保护伞下，普通人的意见对政权根本构不成实质性的威胁。第三，随着美国全球影响力的衰退，为了保护资本与利润，西方国家将不可避免地迎来威权主义，甚至是法西斯主义的回归。当单极世界的垄断红利消退，自由民主制度外衣将暴露出怎样的权力骨架呢？请沉下心来，进入正片，共同推演背后的逻辑链条。
Progressive values and that being something that's important to you. What are progressive values, would you say?
I think progressive values, for me at least, are founded around empathy first and foremost, to try and uplift everyone's material conditions to the best of our ability, and focusing on protecting those who need protection, and simultaneously advancing a cause of the way I think about it, advancing the cause of unlocking the potential of every single person, no matter where they are. Because right now, there are probably billions of brilliant people that never actually get the opportunity to unlock their true potential because of where they're born. Like, they might be born in Sudan, in a village that is being overtaken by the RSF. They might be born in India to an impoverished neighborhood and are not going to have the access to education and therefore be able to truly revolutionize whatever sector they might be interested in revolutionizing. And I think that's what I want to do.
And what do you think is the way to, because I think that's probably something the left and right actually agree on in my experience, the center left, the center right, they're kind of moderate. But I suppose the disagreement probably is about what you think is the way by which that happens. So the right might say, well, the answer to that is capitalism, right? I imagine you don't agree. So how do you think those things get those people who don't currently have opportunity both in this country, in other Western countries, but around the world? What's the mechanism by which they get those opportunities?
I think creating a robust base of support, like a minimum social safety net for all, is the way to do it. And there are many different ways of achieving that result. I don't think capitalism has been able to do that. What I mean by that is capitalism still revolves around the inherent contradiction of at its most reductive way, to put it, someone's got to clean the toilet. And in an effort to make sure that there is always going to be people that are wage laborers, there is this dynamic where we can't advance humanity too much. This plays itself out on the international scale in unequal exchange, where if we were to allow a lot of the third world to develop to a certain degree, then things would be far too costly. We wouldn't get the cheap materials and the cheap natural resources that we need to extract so that we can have an iPhone for the reasonable price of $500, or I mean, even that's increasing now. I personally think that if we were to do that by stopping our endless and needless and cruel militarism in the global South, and allow these places to develop, extend an open hand to them, that we would allow society to flourish in ways that we previously have not foreseen.
I guess your point about cleaning toilets is interesting, because something we've addressed a lot on this trip with guests right, left, center, etc., is the incredible wealth inequality and the speed at which the gap is, that's growing. There's a big problem. People on the right don't want to admit it, and it's true. But on the other hand, someone is always going to have to clean the toilets, right? Like, we have a pretty big safety net in the UK. And what that's mainly done is trapped a lot of people in a place where they don't have to work, and they therefore don't. And also, you talk about, important people from other countries to work for less. Kind of the consequence of that is it suppresses wages for the people in the country as well. So who would clean the toilets if we...
So, great question. Let me address the wage depression aspect of this,
Sure.
because this is the one area where sometimes I hear Tucker Carlson talk about it, and there's like some nuggets of truth in there. Because yes, importing labor into the country will always depress wages in the absence of good regulation. And good regulation in that format would be demanding wage parity, and also not creating any other external factors that actually cause you to have a more servile labor force. What I mean by this is, I want to use the example of H-1B visas. The reason why H-1B visa system exists on paper is because there are certain highly skilled positions that, as it stands, our American companies are unable to fulfill. They're not able to fill those roles with the domestic labor force, right? That's the on paper. In practice, of course, it creates a more pliable labor force that you're bringing in, oftentimes from highly skilled countries that are still desperate, even if there is higher wages on average on the H-1B visa program, because if you lose your job, you get deported. Nobody wants to get deported, so they will do everything in their power to stay and work as hard as they physically possibly can. So this creates an environment where I think our bosses, our capital owners in America, are like, why would I get an American worker who is in comparison to an Indian worker that's coming into the country that is desperate to keep this job? Why would I hire the American worker? I can pay the same fee to the Indian worker, or even a higher fee, as a matter of fact, to the Indian worker, because I know that he is going to work harder than the American labor force. So there is this competition. The way to solve that competition is through regulation. If the workers that were coming in from poorer countries were coming in with the knowledge that they are not going to be immediately deported, for example, and they have wage parity with the domestic labor force, this would actually make American companies think twice before hiring someone just as a replacement for the American worker, because they wouldn't get any additional benefits as a boss. They wouldn't get the additional benefit of like, I'm going to work you to the bone, right? Because I know if I fire you, you're gone. You're gone out of the country and you want to be here. So that is a regulatory mechanism that we never implement in this country, because our capital owners actually enjoy the two-tiered labor structure that we have here.
And come back to the who cleans the toilets, even when there's a social welfare system.
I think that ultimately there's going to be people that fulfill these roles no matter what. And increasingly with automation and with AI, we're getting to a point where the route tasks are already being delegated to robots to begin with. So the way I see it is there's always going to be someone that is tasked with either overseeing it, if it's a robot doing it, or directly doing it. But since it's an important factor in the commodity production, because someone has to engage in sanitation, I think it's much more valuable to ensure that they have a sense of autonomy and that those positions are hired and have enough replacement labor force so that they do less hours in general and still get a decent amount of pay, and so that they can still feel human and have some sense of autonomy in the labor force, where they can do that job and still make an honest living and be able to feed their family and also have some free time on the side to pursue whatever hobbies they want to pursue.
So the way to achieve that would be like what, a really high minimum wage, or like what's the way to get there? Like, because I agree with the idea that people who are working every kind of job should have free time and make a good living. The question is, how do you do that? Because in a market economy, what you are paid is a function of what you produce, right?
Yeah. Well, I think in a market economy, what you are paid should be what you produce. I don't think that that's how it works in the market economy. I think in the market economy, your replaceability is what determines your wages, especially if you are replaceable by a non-domestic labor force, for example. That depresses your wages even further on the domestic front for the citizen labor force. So I think you're right, though. In the market economy, your output should be the determining factor. That's actually a socialist position, ironically enough. Not all socialists are against the market. And I would say that the output is the most consequential factor in that regard. I agree. What that means, however, is that if the company is actually, for example, increasing its output and therefore generating more revenue overall, then everyone down to the most replaceable aspect of labor, which would be sanitation in this regard, should still get paid a just wage, like fair compensation. Minimum wages is one way of doing it as a Band-Aid solution. I mean, but there are Nordic countries, for example, where there is no minimum wage, because the minimum wage would ironically be a depressing factor on the overall average wages that people get. How have they achieved this, though? They've achieved this through sectoral bargaining. They've achieved this through robust unions and labor participation in these wage negotiations. And that is the reason why they don't need to have a minimum wage. The minimum wage in and of itself is a big point of contention in the United States of America and a lot of other Western countries, only because our labor union participation in the United States is at less than 10% right now, which is unimaginably low. It's lower than countries that we have dominated, like Chile, where we rewrote their constitution basically and wanted to unleash a wave of neoliberalism, sometimes in the hands of a dictator like Pinochet. Even in that country, there's still 15% labor union participation. So it's still higher than the United States of America, which is crazy to me.
If you've been following the immigration debate, you'll know how different the headlines can look depending on where you get your news. We use ground news to help us step outside the echo chamber. It shows you how the same story is framed differently across the political spectrum, so you can compare headlines and decide for yourself. Take the story about a massive immigration raid at a Hyundai plant in Georgia, USA. Follow along at ground.news/trigonometry. Using ground news, straight away we can quickly see that the story is being covered by outlets across the board. However, scrolling down the page, ground news allows me to easily compare the headlines. We can see CNN, which is firmly on the left, highlighted that nearly 500 workers were taken, while Fox News, on the right, framed the raid as bold action. Ground news shows us that broadly, left-leaning outlets focused on immigrants and workers, center-leaning outlets simply reported the number detained, and right-leaning outlets emphasized illegal workers. Ground news compiles these divergent perspectives into one place. Another feature we use heavily at Trigonometry is their blind spot feed, which shows you where coverage is lopsided, lets you compare headlines across the political spectrum, and helps you identify what's being emphasized or ignored. If you care about getting to the truth by seeing things from all angles, ground news is essential. Go to ground.news/trigonometry and get 40% off their unlimited Vantage plan. That's the plan we use. That link again is ground.news/trigonometry. Hassan, I've got a lot of empathy for some of your positions, particularly when you talk about low-skilled labour. So, for context, my mother is a Venezuelan immigrant to the UK. When she was in the UK, she was a childminder. There was no minimum wage. My mum, roughly, I remember earning £2.20 an hour. There were no pension rights. So, thankfully, like, I help my parents out. My dad helps my mum out, so she's not destitute. But that's what my mum's position would be if she didn't have me or my father. As somebody who is from Venezuela, I worry when people mention socialism because I've seen what's happened to my country. How would you assuage the fears of people like me or people who come from a Cuban background who've seen the socialist dream, as it were, descend into authoritarianism?
Well, first and foremost, I would say that all countries, to varying degrees, engage in authoritarianism in general. It's just something that it's a function of the government. It obviously has the capacity to get out of hand due to external factors in many instances, like combating much more powerful forces that want to cause instability in your country. It's not a justification for it, but it is analysis in terms of like why these guys engage in the actions that they do, in terms of suppression of all dissent, or even censorship, and sometimes even jail time. And the example I always use is the United States of America, not only in the Cold War, but even preceding the Cold War, during World War I and World War II, actually had a practice of jailing all conscientious objectors, for example, who said, I don't want to fight in this war. They were like, all right, well, this is a world war, sucks to suck, you're going to jail. One of the famous examples is Eugene Debs, a socialist who actually ran from prison and I think achieved like 1.3 million votes at the time, which was probably the most electoral success socialists had ever achieved. He was a conscientious objector of World War I, which was the international Marxist position at the time. There was some deviation there. So I see it in a similar vein when these countries also engage in authoritarian actions, suppressing dissent, censorship, or trying to manage this dynamic of trying to continue doing governance while at the same time they have to like make sure that they're avoiding American intervention or Western intervention in general. As far as the fears that people have, assuaging the fears that people have in terms of what they've seen in their countries, whether it be Venezuela or Cuba, I think each country is different. Each successful and unsuccessful revolution is different. And I think it's important to understand the lessons and the failures, as well as some of the areas of success that these countries have been able to implement. Avoid the failures and try to focus on the successes, and hopefully you'll be able to have a long-standing and relatively happy form of governance.
I mean, I take your point as to the conscientious objector, but you look at Venezuela, for example, and then the reason I'm using it is because that's the example I know best.
Yeah.
You know, you've got rigged elections. You've got politicians who go up against Maduro. They're either thrown in jail, as in the case of Leopoldo Lopez, solitary confinement for 2 years, or you have, I think it's Corina Machado, who got nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize, but she is currently in hiding in her own country because she knows the moment that her whereabouts are known, she's going to get thrown into jail, may not be seen again.
Yeah. I'm not going to defend Maduro, but I would say that the logical through line, and it's important to understand the opposition's logical through line in this instance, is that these are forces that are very directly working with the United States of America, that have tried to facilitate coups, even had an unsuccessful one all the way back in 2002 with Chavez, and numerous other instances, openly talked about implementing coups under the first Trump administration, and is openly now waging war, or at least threatening to wage war with Venezuela right now, encircling the entire coastline of Venezuela with some of the most sophisticated weaponry known to man. In that regard, I think they see it as treason. I would go so far as say, in a similar scenario in the United States of America, I think, and this is not even a one-to-one dynamic because America is the most powerful nation on the planet, but China is getting up there, right? Let's see if China had, if in a hypothetical, if China had encircled the United States of America, and let's say in this hypothetical, I'm like very clearly someone who is going to China and talking to the CPC and saying like, we want Chinese intervention in this country because I hate Donald Trump, please. I think in that regard, America would probably treat me in the exact same way, if not in a worse way, ironically enough.
But would they throw you in jail for trying to run democratically? I don't think personally that they would.
Oh, they absolutely would, I think. You think the American government would not throw me in jail if I was in a comparable scenario where China had encircled the United States of America and I was saying, I want to run democratically. I want to be, and I'm demanding that China intervene. I think they would do the same, if not worse, for sure. Because like I said, it's all a matter of the conditions on the ground. With respect to Eugene Debs, as I was talking about before, America felt threatened even at that time.
You're talking about wartime, though.
Yeah.
This is not a fair comparison, in my opinion, because wartime is wartime. It's about survival. Britain suspended elections during wartime, right? Like
America didn't actually. They even during the Civil War.
But Britain did. America wasn't in war in the same way that Britain was.
That's why I said during the Civil War.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's fair. But again, it's different. I guess you said something interesting because, I was born in the Soviet Union, so we both have direct experience of socialism in various shapes and forms. You talked about, well, there's positives and there's negatives. So is there a country that's done socialism the way that you like?
I would say that I am hypercritical of all forms of governance, including the American one. I think that's not a surprise to you guys, right? And in that same vein, I think like there is critiques to apply to all forms of governance, even socialist ones.
Yeah.
And as far as like getting closer to what I think has been relatively successful, because if ultimately the point of government is to improve the material conditions of all people to the best of your ability, it's not always going to be perfect, but when you are getting, I don't know, the poorest people, the poorest of the dispossessed masses out of a situation where they were servile, the landed gentry, or they were peasants from an agrarian society, or they were dominated by the landlords, but then ultimately they were able to come into modernity and become like a powerhouse, an industrial powerhouse that is competitive with the largest superpower on the planet. I would say if that's the point of good governance, and I think you guys might agree with me on that, I would say China is probably the closest. And there are still plenty of failures within the Chinese system as well, plenty of issues within the Chinese system as well. But that's probably the closest, I would say, to an example that we should follow and lessons that we should learn from. This is something that I talk about quite a bit. Ironically enough, we only utilize some of the most repressive elements of Chinese governance here in the United States of America, especially in the second Trump administration, and none of the good stuff. We don't have any high-speed rail. We don't have any even development. There is seemingly nothing to look forward to in America in terms of economic prosperity, in terms of overall health of society, in terms of scientific achievements. And I think a lot of younger people also feel the same way, where they feel like there's nothing to look forward to here. And I'll give you guys an example from the UK. I remember seeing this TikTok of this guy that goes around and is like asking young British people, would they serve in the British military? And I am not even remotely nationalistic by any measure. I don't care about those sorts of things. But I think it's important to understand, like, it's a good way to see the temperature of society. And a lot of the young British people were like, no, why would I fight for England? Why would I fight for the UK when it seems like my government's not even fighting for me at all? And
see, the reason a lot of them will say that, though, is it's not so much about that we're not like China in terms of building high-speed rail, although that is a big issue in the UK.
Yes.
I agree with you. The main reason is they feel like they've been let down by mass immigration that's eroding the values of their country. And of course, this is where I think people on the right are very blind to this issue that we already raised, which is wealth inequality and opportunity. Right?
I'm sure there are some people who feel that way, of course, but
well, think about this, Hassan.
But
right? Hold on, let me just finish the point. Like, stereotypically speaking, is it left of center people or right of center people that are going to go and fight for their country? Typically, it's going to be right of center people because of the mindset that they have. right?
I think when push comes to shove, everybody fights for their country because that's why you have to have a draft.
In a war. But what we're talking about in this situation is, will you go and serve in the armed forces? That is going to be a more right-leaning perspective. And those people, we probably, fair to say, know the UK pretty well. Those people are concerned about the national identity of their country. It's like, why would I fight for a country that doesn't feel like my country is the issue for them.
This is where the big point of division comes for someone like myself. You're Venezuelan originally, your family came from Venezuela, your family came from the USSR. You guys are the most British people I've ever encountered.
I have a very British face, yes. You are correct.
Yeah, exactly. You're British to the bone.
Yeah.
And yet your families also came from countries that were somewhat far away from England, right?
Yeah.
And I'm Turkish. I grew up in Turkey. My whole family lives in Turkey still, with some exceptions. And I would say I'm pretty assimilated to American culture. I grew up being fascinated by American culture. I grew up consuming American pop culture, as do many people all around the world. And what I always find interesting is when people focus on the newcomers, to say that this is actually destroying the social fabric or social cohesion, not realizing that there are a ton of polls conducted on this stuff. I can just speak for America, especially, where by the second generation, assimilation is almost complete. And by the third one, it's like virtually impossible to distinguish in terms of performance, educational output, and job performance in general. It's just like everyone becomes American.
That's not true in the UK, though, unfortunately. So if you look at, for example, Islamist radicalization, second and third generation Muslims are much more radical than first generation.
Yeah.
So we're not, that's the issue that a lot of people in Britain are concerned about, is not everyone's assimilating the way that the three of us have done.
So here's the interesting point about that. Well, two things I want to address. First, like I said, people assimilate. And they become a part of the
some people
normal forces of society. They become a part of the culture, or they bring some aspect of their culture into British culture. They change the cuisine, and people seemingly enjoy it, even if they also simultaneously go attend an EDL rally and then get a little quick curry afterwards, or a little kebab on the side. But beyond that, the reason why people are angry is always going to be because the trains are not running on time, because the NHS is improperly managed due to underfunding. That's what I believe. I think it's always an issue of underfunding, where they're not getting the same services that they once used to, and also things are becoming more and more costly. So in that anger, it's much easier for them to be guided by the right-wing forces to turn around and say, you're angry and you're right to be angry. And the reason why you're angry, the reason why all of these things are happening, is because we are importing all of these random strangers into the country who don't speak your language, who you are scared by. And that, I think, causes division, and it causes friction that makes it harder for people to integrate. And that is part of the reason why I think, especially in a place like the UK, you see a little bit more of this resilience towards full-blown integration into society.
I also think as well, Hassan, if we're being honest, it's also because we have had such huge amounts of immigration come into the country that people understandably go, this pace of change is too much. And you have to think, let's go back to 2016, which was the Brexit referendum. Now, Brexit was about many things, but really it was about people wanting immigration to be lowered. And that was nigh on 10 years ago. Immigration hasn't been lowered. In fact, it's been ratcheted up. So people people voted to lower immigration. And for instance, I voted Remain. People voted Brexit. I'm like, well, that's democracy. We get on. We're going to make the best of it. I do believe that when you ignore people's wishes at the ballot box and people explicitly vote for something and you ignore them for the best part of a decade, that does generate a lot of anger, and understandably so.
Yeah, I think in that same time frame, if there was enough appetite by the government to address the financial harm that people were experiencing, the economic struggles that people were experiencing, there would still be a lot of people who say, I don't want a brown person, I don't want a black person around in my neighborhood. But ultimately, those numbers would be far smaller. And that's what I always go back to. I'm a leftist. I believe in economic improvements, and I believe that a lot of the reactionary forces actually take advantage of that instability, the economic volatility that exists, in an effort to shift the attention away to people who have the same exact interests as you and I do. Because ultimately,
欢迎回到胤蓝智库。波利较激烈的辩论情绪，我们可以清晰地看到一条关于权力、资本与自由的利益传递链。自由往往只是霸权的盈余。西方社会内部的稳定，长期建立在国际范围内的不平等交换之上，限制第三世界的发展，为西方换来了廉价的资源与商品。这种外部红利充当了内部矛盾的降压阀，让民众沉迷于消费或不受监管的金融市场，进而钝化了对阶级压迫的感知。嘉宾犀利的推演，如果在假设的极端场景中，美国被全面包围并面临生存危机，处于战时状态的美国，同样会毫不犹豫地用强权镇压意见。然而，全球化结构正在逆转，当外部利润下降，内部利益分配必然失衡。资本在面对动荡时，首先的诉求永远是恢复秩序。历史的经验表明，一旦自由市场机制无法保障资本的稳定运转，统治阶层往往会向威权力量寻求结盟，从而压制任何形式的反对声音。当前西方多国针对抗压者的打压，正是这种威权抬头的早期症状。归根结底，国家治理的本质不在乎于贴上何种主义的标签。嘉宾的最终推论是，任何国家只要能持续推进最广泛群众的物质需求，并在全球博弈中确立真正的自主权，其内部必然会向拥有更多公民和社会自由的方向演进。因为确保民众物质条件不断改善，才是维系社会契约最成功的统治方式。这里是胤蓝智库，致力于从复杂的表象中抽丝剥茧，看透几层逻辑。感谢您的收看，我们下期为你深度推演。